Hi, here we are with the Chapter 3 essay, How Does Gender Affect the Monster? We're about halfway through the semester now. Well, we're in the second half now. And gender, of course, is a very big deal. In some ways, we look at gender and we say, okay, monsters are always big and strong and muscular, so they must be masculine, male gender. Well, a lot of monsters are not male gender. But also, this chapter asks us to look at who the monster attacks, the potential victims, if you will, of the monster. And this chapter will eventually get us to something that you may have heard of called the final girl. The questions for the essay are here, right? And as we've done in the past, each of these questions reflects something in one of the essays of the chapter. So we have Fuller, Stoker, Stang, Kingshill, Davis, Morris, Clover, Halberstam. I encourage you to read through those, see what's interesting, and then look at the questions. Remember, the questions are not the same questions that are on the discussion thread. Those are different questions. So these are the questions for the essay. I'm not going to read them because it would take too long. But what I do want you to do is go through the chapter 3, look at all the different topics that are being taken on. For instance, Fuller, the first one, takes on the figure of La Llorona. If you've never heard of La Llorona, I think you'll be very excited and pleased to read about her. She's an interesting character. Comes from Mexico, comes from, according to Fuller, some very, very deep roots, both pre-colonialism, right? And then when the Spanish came, there's some figures within that history and the mythology that are also connected to La Llorona. Bram Stoker is, of course, the author of Dracula. We have a short passage from the original Dracula book. And in this passage, Jonathan Harker, the young man who has been taken captive in Dracula's castle, winds up in a very uncomfortable situation with 3 female vampires. He is saved, if you want to call it saved, by Dracula himself. But saved for what reason and what purpose? Very scary. Stang takes on the issue of video games. If you're a fan of video games, you might really want to investigate this essay very carefully because Sarah Stang examines the feminine monster, the female monster, I should say, in video games. Although it could be, it's understandable that I said feminine because what Stang notes is how hypersexualized many of the female characters are in video games, including the female monsters. Kingshill looks at the mermaid, but she has a new take on it. The mermaid, not as we saw it in The Little Mermaid or in Splash or other earlier renditions of the traditional mermaid. Kingshill takes a look at the mermaid and argues how the mermaid can be a symbol for female empowerment, and not just because of its deadly consequences. It's really all about free agency. In other words, the idea that these creatures do what they will. In a similar vein, Jalandra Davis takes on also the story of a mermaid. In this case, this is a mermaid story somewhat similar to Ariel and the Little Mermaid, but instead, this is an African mermaid, and she saves a young man who had been trapped, imprisoned on a ship, taking him to the so-called New World to be enslaved. And this new character has consequences for her actions too, just as Ariel had consequences for her actions. Very interesting piece by Jalandra Davis. Gary Morris writes about a movie called The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, we talked about Frankenstein in chapter 1, and particularly Mary Shelley's passage, but you'd have to be living under a rock not to be aware of the movie that was made in the 1930s. Very popular, right? It's kind of got the classic idea of what we think the creature looks like and acts like and behaves like. Okay, that's from that classic 1930s movie of Frankenstein. Well, James Whale, the director of that movie, was asked to do another movie, a sequel, if you will. And after much urging, he agreed, and thus was born The Bride of Frankenstein. But Morris talks about The Bride of Frankenstein movie in a very different light. That James Whale, who was a homosexual, living in a time when homosexuality was not only discouraged, but illegal, he coded many messages in the movie. Gary Morris does an excellent job of sifting through that movie and showing us what we may have never seen before. Carol Clover, in her piece, addresses something called the final girl. In fact, Clover's article on the final girl, her concept, if you will, of the final girl, the last survivor at the end of a slasher film, has been so popular, so well thought of, that it has kind of become a thing, if you will, a trope that has been played with, repeated, rejected, but always in some way it's still there. So this is the original work that Clover wrote in the early 1990s, in which she argued about the nature of the final girl. The last work, Bodies That Splatter, Queers and Chainsaws by Jack Halberstam. Now, Halberstam's an interesting person. Halberstam teaches at Columbia University, used to actually be out here locally at UCSD a long time ago. Long time ago, Jack Halberstam was Judith Halberstam, and obviously he transitioned. Halberstam takes on what is referred to as a queer interpretation. And Halberstam looks at this final girl that Clover wrote about and says, well, maybe there's more to it, and argues for basically a monster gender. That in fact, in these slasher films, we move beyond the categories of male and female and construct a new category, a new gender, what Halberstam terms monster gender. Halberstam looks very carefully at the classic movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, not 1, but the sequel 2, in making this case. Now, if none of those questions appeal to you, there is the alternative open question. Construct your own argument about gender and the monster, keeping in mind the wide range of possible issues, such as agency, identity, sexuality or sexual expression, social norms, religion, tradition, or others. The final draft of the essay is going to be due Monday, July 27th, 11:59 p.m. Be sure to follow the out-of-class essay guidelines for all matters of form and style. Be sure to include a word count at the end of your essay. Remember, you must meet minimum requirements, including word count, sources, and subject matter. No late essays will be accepted without a signed doctor's note or legal notice that you have to be somewhere. Now, as we have done previously, we break this down into parts. The first is the thesis topic outline. Submit a thesis statement and topic outline to Canvas by Friday, July 17th. do the outline as you did for the previous 2 chapters. Okay, so in other words, you have a thesis, that's just one sentence. You have a concession, again, that'll just be one sentence. You have, but really are going to be topic sentences, but they're the main body topics. Again, just single sentences. You don't have to do anything for the conclusion. Then make sure you have MLA citation entries for 2 sources, neither from the textbook. But this time I want one of those to be a scholarly source. There will be instruction in the module. I'm going to make a video for you guys on how to find a scholarly source, because a scholarly source is not just any source. A participation grade will be assigned for this. Okay. And as we've done previously, the class will be divided into workshop groups. These will be new groups, but use the same instruction as you did for the earlier work groups to get to your group on Canvas. Submit your rough draft to your workshop group and to me by Wednesday, July 22nd. Submit completed peer editing sheets to your workshop group and to me by Friday, July 24th. All those, you have the full day going to 11:59 p.m. So just review. The minimum requirements are again about 1,000 to approximately 1,400 words. Probably don't need much more than that. So far this semester, anybody who's gone really long, I've probably told you, hey, you could have cut some. A strong essay structure, including introduction, concession, rebuttal, arguments, main body, and conclusion. I want you to have 4 sources as the minimum, at least 3 of which originate in print or have print analogs, not including our textbook. So print sources include newspaper, magazines, academic journals, books, government reports, things like that. They do not include things like TV shows and movies, although obviously those can be used. At least 2 of the sources must be scholarly works, such as dissertations, peer-reviewed journal articles, or university press books. That's what I'm going to talk to you about how to find, how to get to those sorts of sources. And of course, those automatically are print analog, just by definition. MLA format and presentation and documentation, including correct works cited list. And again, you can go back to the introductory module, take a peek at the MLA format sheet that's there, take a peek at the chapter 1 MLA sheet, which is a good way to see how we do the textbook. Whether it's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 doesn't actually matter. It's all the format, right? So all that, and then of course in the web links, you have additional resources for MLA format. Okay? So this is very interesting, I think. This chapter has lots and lots of possibilities. Lots of things to talk about with gender and the monster.